All right, let's stay with this particular issue. Let's speak now to Mavuso, Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership in Africa. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Government saying it is withdrawing the exemption for now, as it relates to Eskom. This is to consult further with, among others, the AG, who says that they ought to have put, they have input, in fact, on how such gazettes are framed. And of course, this is something that a lot of people have been talking about. Was this latest development, in your view, inevitable?
I guess it was, Bongiwe, and I think it's great that the finance minister has decided to heed the public outcry, which really stems from concern, concern that emanates from what continues to happen in Eskom in particular. And I really think that the way they were going about this is not the right way. And yes, we understand that they wanted to protect the credit rating and audit opinion of Eskom. But when you look at it, in doing so, they were really going to seriously undermine governance, and they were really seriously to undermine the very purpose of an audit. Because when you look at it, what is the purpose of an audit? It is to provide reliability and integrity of information. What, therefore, is the level of reliance that would have been placed in Eskom's annual financial statements with this exemption? Would the audit opinion of Eskom, would it have been worth the paper it is written on? So as much as their reasoning may have been justified, but we really have to be careful as a country about coloring outside of the lines and bending the rules when it suits us. Because rules are there for a reason, to force us to observe governance which is seriously required in Eskom in particular. I mean, you're talking about an entity that still has serious remnants of state capture, which is still the ground zero for siphoning funds out of the state. An entity which supposedly bleeds about R1 billion per month due to corruption. So it wouldn't have worked. And it's interesting, because the outcry from the public merely says to government that there is a serious trust deficit between the South African public and the South African, constituency and stakeholders and government. It seriously says that we are not convinced, that government has done enough to display an unequivocal zero tolerance to corruption. You get government officials who are implicated in these nefarious activities who continue to walk around with impunity. And really that doesn't scream confidence. We are also not convinced that government would have been able to put the necessary guardrails, to ensure that this intervention is not abused, And I think similar to the state of disaster, we know what happened with the state of disaster around COVID. People that were meant to benefit from the accelerated procurement didn't benefit. The money ended up going into government officials' pockets. You had witnesses and whistleblowers lose their lives, over this entire thing. So I don't think that we're actually convinced enough as the South African public that these interventions that are meant to assist Eskom, assist the government, assist the fiscal of the economy, were actually not going to be abused.
And Busi, looking at the fact that, this trust deficit, and you look at, for example, Afrobarometer talks about, this trust deficit and the gap continues to widen. It's likely to continue to widen then, particularly if these announcements are being made before ticking all the boxes, because for the minister to announce it and then get a phone call from the AG's office, and the AG says, but we've got to have, an input on how these things are being done. And then the minister comes and says to Parliament, okay, we now need to go back again to meet with various stakeholders. The trust gap is going to further widen if this continues.
It will, right? And I think ticking all the boxes to ensure that you follow the necessary processes is particularly important. But also, what environment are you putting these interventions in? Because nothing is convincing us that the Eskom environment will be made better, right, to ensure that this, particular exemption is not abused, but also if you are going to do this at Eskom, there's what, 743 state-owned entities, all of which are having serious problems in as far as the balance sheets are concerned. All of them need to be able to raise finances, all of them need funding to be able to turn the entities around. So how long is this piece of string? So you're going to bend the rules for Eskom. What stops you from bending the rules for all the other state-owned entities that are actually in the same position? So I don't think that this was going to fly. Surely there should be better mechanisms which still observe governance around doing a balance sheet optimization exercise to see how do we best leverage the balance sheet of this entity, without that flying in the face of governance, as it were. So I don't think we probably maybe looked at all the alternatives hard enough, and to your point, to do this without actually observing the necessary processes. That already raises our eyebrows, as the South African public, to say, how do we do something like this without having consulted the AG's office?
And is there a way, as you say, that, they need to look at other ways, because they argue that for them, this is more to boost the balance sheet. This is to ensure that Eskom, is able to have some kind of, ability to improve its financial position. Is there any other way, as they go back now to speaking to various stakeholders, of doing this in a way that could be palatable?
I think there are probably more qualified people than I am who can actually give us options. But a balance sheet optimization exercise is a way in which it can be done just to bring experts on board to look at how best Eskom's balance sheet can actually be optimized. I know this exercise was done at Eskom, I think at about 2019. Surely that can be dusted off to see what are the other alternatives that were actually provided by that exercise. And I think this is precisely the problem that you get with government and a whole lot of these entities. We embark on these processes and on these interventions and on these fact-finding missions like it was done in 2019 in Eskom, and you don't know where that report ends up. I know that report, one of the interventions that it proposed was precisely what was done by government in February during the budget speech, of saying that because already the debt of government is guaranteed, or the debt of Eskom is guaranteed by government, it has already been priced into the country risk. So take some of the Eskom's balance sheet just so that you give it some breathing space for it to be able to borrow funds using its own balance sheet. And I think that was ignored then. And I mean, the amount then was not the 254 billion that we actually had to take now. It was only 100 billion, 150 billion. So probably maybe this is an interesting business case around looking at what a delayed decision, could have from an impact perspective. Because it's interesting, to me, to say if that decision, if those outcomes that were actually provided, or alternatives and solutions that were provided by that balance sheet optimization exercise in 2019, if it was implemented then, would we be here as a country? Would Eskom's credit rating be as bad as it is now? Would we have reached stage 6 load shedding, or would we have been able to actually get the funding that was required early on for us to be able to intervene, on the power stations' perspective, to accelerate, our generation capacity and fix those power stations that are actually out of service at the moment, because they need funding for them to be put to optimal use and for them to actually be put back onto the grid and stuff like that. So I really think that these things need to be carefully looked at. But again, there's always an alternative. We are not going to take shortcuts as a country because it suits us. Eskom is not the first entity to be in this position. I think if we cast the net wide enough, there are people who do corporate finance, who look at these things and who can actually give us, a more legitimate and governance-friendly way in which something like this can be done.
And of course, you touched on it a little earlier on, the state of disaster, of course, on electricity now being terminated. Government saying that this is motivated by the fact that a number of measures are being taken to address the electricity crisis and the impact on the economy without a state of disaster at the same time. There were also those legal issues that were pending. Alta and Solidarity, taking this particular matter to court. Looking at this latest turn of events where government is concerned and this legal action that was looming, do you think it was a coincidence?
I don't think so. I don't think it was a coincidence. I really think that it was precisely, of this outer action that they actually decided to backtrack and to actually walk their decision back, as it were. And I really think that as soon as that state of disaster was announced in February, all of us said, what guardrails are going to put in place, Mr. President? Because we know what happened in 2020 around the PPE procurement and the state of disaster that was actually put in place then. And there was nothing that was announced by government, neither the president, and no follow-up communication around what government was going to do differently this time around, because we witnessed an unfortunate situation where, money that was intended to serve the poor, money that was actually intended for PPE, for the sick and dying, to give groceries to the poor, ended up, with elected officials. And I really think that didn't augur well, for the country. So the activism that you're actually seeing in the South African environment, I think is precisely what we need, to change the economic trajectory in this country, to get government to probably maybe pause and listen on some of these decisions that they're actually making. I think this kind of participation is probably what will save South Africa when all is said and done, because let's agree that without the necessary interventions, when you look at where our country is at the moment, when you look at everything that is actually not going right, I was looking at it when I was saying we are going into an investment conference next week. In reality, when you look at it, what really is the business case that we are giving to investors for them to come and invest in this country? And you can see that that business case is very thin. East Africa is eating South Africa's breakfast right now. South Africa is no longer, the central destination for channeling funds into the African continent. Investment that is meant for South Africa is actually going into other African countries who have got their story and their environments much more conducive. So I think all of these are actually similar issues, issues that are not necessarily mutually exclusive, that really require government to start engaging with these issues from a different perspective. Business is asking us a lot of difficult questions, especially our international partners. Those companies that are headquartered outside of the country are asking their CEOs in South Africa very difficult questions around the state of energy. So when we make decisions like this, which give us a pass, in terms of continuing, first an environment of corruption, it doesn't augur well. Lawlessness, seems to be the number one risk that South Africa is actually sitting with. So government having made this decision was actually not going to work, and it really would have put us in a worse position, as it were.
All right, let's see then what happens with the other exemption, which is on hold for now as they go back to talk about this particular matter, and what becomes of some of the issues at Eskom, as they say that they're still committed to dealing with this particular crisis. Thank you so much for your time. Do appreciate it. That is Mavuso, Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership South Africa. She is, in fact, from Business Leadership South Africa. And really, this is one of those stories that we are going to continue to watch for you here on the channel as we continue then to see different developments on this particular Eskom story.